Sorry.
Oh, Christ, he's tall, isn't he?
Our last speaker for the morning session, Remigijus, Simasius, our man from Lithuania.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak and to have the opportunity to be there. And also, thank you, Hans, for suggesting this kind of long but nice title for my presentation. I think those of you who've seen the movie about singing revolution in Estonia and Baltic states has a kind of introduction to my speech. But actually, my speech will not be only about the experience of Baltic states. We'll have some theoretical insights about neighbors who are burning down, and also some historical reflections on how to deal with those goods. Of course, the topic as such is quite interesting between this theoretical and practical aspects, but I will try to provide some part of maneuver between these two things. I must say that libertarian scholars, of course, have contributed a lot to different topics related to this, like secession or isolationism or political competition or the essence and genesis of modern state and warfare, imperialism and similar topics, and of course private production of defense and similar things. But of course, not always applying these principles today is very easy. It doesn't always satisfy the needs of those people who are living in small communities. And therefore, there are some examples like the Ministry of National Defense, which is here, but of course some questions are not answered. And for example, one of those questions is the question how to defend the country from the perspective of a small country, because when you look at Austrian literature on the issue, you may see that usually, all Austrian scholars, they do live in big states, and mostly the United States. And it's not a surprise that, of course, they focus their interest of both scholarly research and political activities also on big states. And for example, as Roberts says, during my lifetime, my ideological and political activism has focused on opposition to America's wars, of course, to America's wars, and that's very understandable. But the question is that, of course, many people do not live in big states, but they live in small states, and they have to have something addressed to them. And in case of small states, there is no privilege for people of those states to discuss about imperialism, isolationism, and similar concepts, because it is usually not small states who act as the first ones. It's usually big states who start some kind of conflict or war. And it is only the reaction what is left to small states. And those concepts are usually not discussed so much. Or what actually worries small states is just what kind of strategy would be most suitable to defend the country. And of course, the libertarians have answered to this question partly because there is many literature that prove that, of course, free states is better and so on. But in case of, let's say, some projects for free countries or free states, I think that, or in general discussing the issue, I think that two, not mistakes, but dead ends are met. One is when people try to draft the practical either constitution or approach towards the problem, and like sometimes like Roderick Long, in actually proposing a kind of minimal states, or even not minimal states, in order to defend the country, which I think is wrong. Or other almost dead end practically is when we discuss theoretical aspects of private production of defense, but we see that our political reality, and also prejudices of general public do not allow this principles to be implemented. And also some theoretical questions do remain. And for example, as Professor Hoppe says, that centralization is frequently progressive, and then the colonial process was very often very progressive. But when you look practically, it's very difficult to distinguish what kind of centralization is progressive one, and what kind of centralization is just reflection of ruling practices. And of course, you have to answer these questions every day when you meet some kind of conflicts. And of course, in libertarian literature, sometimes you raise a question that maybe the state is never to defend a country because state as such is a plunder and maybe even if the state has an army, it doesn't have to defend the country in case of conflict. But in this case, I want to cite Robert again, and he said that concerning this kind of discussion, he said that the libertarian should say, in effect, to the state, all right, you exist, but as long as you exist, at least confine your activities to the area which you monopolize. It actually means that Robert again is in favor of if the state is already existing and the army is already existing, you need to import that army in case of war. Some remarks about political bullying. Everyone has an image of a bully. Of course, I have also one. Of course, as being libertarians, we see bullying in our state or in our government, and that's also true. But of course, we have some image of foreign bullying as well, or very often, or especially being from smaller states. It's not maybe such a case in the United States, but it's definitely a case in Central Europe. But of course, the more interesting question is how we define a bullying, because it's not always an easy question. And I want to cite a popular definition of bullying at school. It's completely different, but this very reflects our topic. And bullying involves desire to hurt, hurtful action, a power imbalance, typically repetition, and unjust use of power, evident employment by the aggressor, and a sense of being oppressed on the part of the victim. So these are the general description of the bullying, which is, I think, quite suits also our topic as well. But when we turn to practicalities of international policy, it's very difficult, as I said, to distinguish what is bullying. I will name some examples, just saying some examples to illustrate that. For example, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict concerning Karabakh. Who is bullied and who is not? Or US wars against country X, against some country. Of course, it's very difficult to define who is bullied and who is not. Or, for example, the Kurdistan question or Iraq-Kurdistan-Turkey question. We had some reflections on this yesterday. Who is bullied? And we saw examples that everyone is bullied. Or, for example, Russia and Georgia in case of Abkhazia. What is Abkhazia for foreigners, for strangers? Is it a secessionist state, or is it kind of reflection of Russian bullying in case of or Israel-Palestine or Israel-Arab world conflict? What is that? And again, as Robert says, there are always the difficulty in spotting the real aggressor in any particular war. When both sides are armed camps, when there are many provocations, secret treaties, deals, and frontier incidents, the question of contributing the actual starter of war, let alone who is more morally wrong, becomes a matter of the careful research of future historians. It's not a simple question. And of course, I have to admit also that usually the bully is inside the country, and this is a nasty picture. This one's from Romania, but it's quite typical for many countries about how their governments are expelling people and killing them. And according to Rumel, as you know, about 170 million people were killed during the 20th century by their governments. And according to other estimations, there are 262 million people killed by their governments in 20th century. But let me turn to another question. Is bullying always wrong? And for example, there was a case 3 years ago concerning Russia-Ukraine conflict concerning gas supply. It was treated as an eye-opener case for Western world, showing how Russia uses energy tool as geopolitical tool. But I think that this example is completely wrong, because actually what happened there was negotiation concerning price, and Russia was to charge market price because Ukraine had to energy inflation. But of course, it's not beneficial to people of Russia to use energy tool as like buying other neighbors. But of course, it's not bullying. Or let's take another example. We see kind of map there of Baltic Sea, and there's recent discussion taking place for 3 years already. It's a project for gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. And actually, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland are very much opposing the gas pipeline because they are not going through their countries. And of course, it means that all those countries will not have an instrument to press Russia in some cases instant. And actually, if you look carefully to some aspects of political life, you can see there's some enclave, Russian enclave between Poland and Lithuania, and almost all transit comes through Lithuania. And actually, Lithuania was using it as a tool against Russia. And what is that? It's not bullying. Even small relative free state against big relative and free state may be a bully in some cases. So bully or bad guy is not always wrong, or not bully or good guy is not always right. Or we can say that all states are bullying around if they only have the possibility to do it. And now let me turn to the strategies of how to deal with bullying neighbor. And of course, there are some strategies like fighting or resisting in case of conflicts, allying or having a strong friend, obeying or buying out your freedom, collaborating with a bully, or the last one, which is quite untypical, but I would like to stress, being open to foreign investment, which I think is very essential. But before going into details, let me again speak about some fallacies concerning this. One is that it's usual to treat that small is always weak, but in fact it's not true. And of course the history also proved this, starting with the fact that all big nations once were small nations, and the fact that during world wars small nations do survive. And actually, as Mises points out, there's usually help coming from abroad for small states because of different reasons, and small states are not bad, and prospects for small states are not necessarily so bad, in contrary to what is popular belief. And this case of Singing Revolution is one of successful examples of surviving for small states. Another notion which is wrong, I think, is that free means weak, because it is usual to think that if you have free, prosperous country, it means that it has very little centralized military power to resist a strong good neighbor, and it means that this free country may be occupied very easily because there's no army to resist. But in fact, it is not true. In fact, in the press you see more pictures like this when strong bully is weak, but not small state. But just to turn to more to older maybe authors, even Machiavelli argues that small states are strong and sometimes even dangerous to other states. Small and free states are strong and sometimes even dangerous to other states. And he points out that the free nations are more prosperous and thus better armed. They are more politically stable and thus harder to defeat through treachery. There is high moral among their citizens, thus making them better soldiers or defenders of the country. And equal opportunity and free competition among citizens tend to reward and thus foster efficiency in freer states. And the high standard of living enjoyed by free nations tend to increase in population, thus creating a pressure to expand into the territory of their neighbors. So that's completely opposite arguments, which I think are quite reasonable ones. But of course, these are historical arguments, and we may have very different situations. And in fact, when historian Charles Tilly rightly says about when wars do occur, and he says that the central tragic fact is simple: coercion works. Those who apply substantial force to their fellows get compliance, and from that compliance draw the multiple advantage of money, goods, deference, access to pleasures denied to less powerful people. Actually, it works. And of course, bullying sometimes is a good strategy, the same as for racketeers in case of against business people, for example. And one more interesting thing is that the same historical analysis also showed that coercion and capital are intertwined in the genesis of states and wars, or successful states and wars. It may be a coercion in the first place, which require capital and then get stronger and stronger, or it may be capital first which actually finances some bullets in order to drop the body. Then that's sort of fact. In fact, sometimes in doesn't matter because historically we see that they often conquerors actually those who are conquered. And for example, the Greeks had been on the Roman, for example, the case of during religious Lithuanian peoples of France, and the Lithuanian was civilized, or it is often like all sorts of examples. So being conquered is not a big deal. That's total. There are general strategies of this, and every other side works in saying that there is not pacifist theology. So therefore, also, then it is not pacifist politics. We do not hold the pacifist violence and suffering is not that. It's not pacifist. So we recently have an embarrassing group of all. But recently, we hear what is defense itself, the defense campaigns, politics, the focus using this share of the laws, this intelligence, and in the case of elder free side, the possibility of about state army defense actions in state army did exist before. Of course, the prospects of conflict between neighbors are not clear, but you would literally see one successful examples, and let's start with some examples. Actually, the lack of sanctions, and it's for example, for some nations, what possible to that without achieve this of station. Of course, it is possible to have some systems of powers. But then you have this is Hans-Hermann initiative networks. And there are about 700 documents taken from Lumen, as well as from 1.3 billion, 10 countries. Of course, this kind of personal the treatment, and nothing that people are productive to everyone else also direct reaction. Things were not foul. And what one of the topics was a kind of financial institution of the environment, that is the chief of because the utility is also discussion and finance and price. And of course, no utility will be good to the fees of some countries like a chance of you. I'm sure it's we like this copy of it's assumed in mass or it's not at all. I'm not sure, but also, one example, just now with Finland. Finland doesn't have such as Switzerland and tradition, but it's achieved a lot during the 20th century. First of all, it gained independence from Russia, as well as other Baltic states. Then, during Russia's attack on Finland actually didn't lose the war. It was basically afterwards, but despite the huge outnumbering by Russians, Finland did resist. But speaking about outnumbers, there were four times more soldiers in the case of Russia, 200 times more tanks, and 30 times more aircrafts. And still, Russians didn't win the war. And then Finland was not occupied by Germans, of course, partly because it was collaborating with Germany. And how Finland did achieve that? Of course, the territory was also easy to defend again, but not so difficult to defend again. Popular participation in army, training in militia structures, and the militia of Finland as well. So popular militia was the case in Finland. Once in Finland, people are again were patriotic, and the fact is that it was popular uprising which helped Finland to get independence from Russia in 1980. But the fact remains that most countries didn't resist strong powers during World War II. For example, Baltic states didn't resist, or Czech didn't resist. German army, even some military historians said that the Czechs had even stronger equipment than the Germans. But the story is not as simple. Let me compare what actually Finns achieved, because in fact, Finns didn't win the war. They lost about 10% of territory. They lost thousands of lives. And of course, it was quite a big disaster for Finland. But afterwards, they didn't get some Marshall Plan's money from the West and so on. But actually, what they do have now, they have prosperous society anyway. And in case of non-resisting countries like Lithuania, for example, we didn't lose any soldier during that period when non-resisting. But afterwards, we lost about 1/4 to 1/3 of the population, and we lost everything economically. And looking from nowadays perspective, it looks like resisting them was a better solution than non-resisting. But on the other hand, let me also show some insight of good tactics of Lithuanians against Soviet Union, how it worked. But first of all, let me say that state were not capable of doing it. In the left, you see the Lithuanian army before World War II. It's not very it doesn't look very strong, but anyway, in case of Lithuania, it was like a prestige to have a strong army, to serve an army, and the army was quite heavily financed. But during World War II, of course, all the arms were seized by Russians and used against Lithuanians afterwards. But the next picture is the Lithuanian partisans or guerrilla fighters after World War II. And of course, guns are completely different than those that were financed through taxpayers' money before World War II. These were guns that simply kept home as a militia groups or seized from enemy. But these were completely different guns. It didn't help at all. But speaking about the relative success of Lithuania, first of all, let's start with this Russification process, which was also here in the movie you saw the day before history. In Lithuania, we have about 10% of people immigrated from Soviet Union. In Estonia, at the moment, we have about 35%, and in Latvia, we have about 45%. So the difference is quite huge. And Lithuania had even disadvantaged situation concerning this, because almost 1/3 of Lithuania's territory was depopulated after World War II, because Lithuania got back Vilnius from another big power, Poland, after World War II, and about 300 Jews were killed, and then many Poles left this territory. And we got Klaipėda, or Mainland region, which again, the Lithuanians and Germans actually left the country. And these were depopulated areas. So it looked like a good opportunity for newcomers just to come and settle. But actually there were two strategies which worked in this case. First one was very intensive guerrilla work, which was even more intensive in Lithuania than in Latvia and Estonia. And there was, again, some accidents which created an atmosphere or an image that is very unsafe for Soviets, for normal Soviet men to go to Lithuania, because there's a possibility that you would be killed. But that's it. So in small cities and villages, there was no possibility for newcomers to come, because it was huge resistance. And resistance, to speak about numbers of the resistance, there in 1 year, like 45, there were about from 30,000 to 100,000 of Lithuanian fighters in the forest, and its forest brothers. And actually, it was recorded that sometimes the chiefs of the units actually sent soldiers home as a reserve, because there was enough fighters. So it means that actually all nation was fighting against Russian invasion, especially right after the World War II. And then another strategy concerning this immigration was completely different. It means it was collaboration of Lithuanians with Russians. Because the participation of Lithuanians in Lithuanian Communist Party was much, much higher than participation of Latvians or Estonians in their communist parties. And it meant that, of course, they had stronger power and they had the possibility to manipulate or play double games. And in case of industrialization, it was able to send Lithuanian peasants to those new industry zones, but not to invite newcomers from other countries. So this is quite a brilliant achievement if you compare. And this offers again some of these two tactics how to deal in such a difficult situation. Of course, there is a possibility to have a strong friend and ally. And that's, I think, is very important. And for example, in the case of Kuwait, it worked very well, because Kuwaitians were free riders, and then U.S. soldiers fought for the independence, and that was great for Kuwait people. It was not maybe so great for U.S. taxpayers, but it was great for Kuwait people. So why not to free ride and to have this strong ally? And of course, allying with your neighbors or small free neighbors is also very important. And for example, in the case of Lithuania, it's well established fact that Russian secret services were paying Lithuanian national ruling party before World War II in order to keep the conflicts between Lithuania and Poland alive. Because they didn't want Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to make an alliance against possible threats from Russia. And were successful. And in fact, if we had this kind of alliance, maybe the outcome of history would be quite different. Of course, obeying a bully is again quite a tactics. And yesterday also we heard an example of Kurds who were kind of deciding who will defend them. And in fact, this was quite a novel example in ancient times. And for example, there's well-recorded actions of Palermo citizens who actually were choosing defenders very often and switched them quite often. And sometimes there's a joke that some cities are never conquered, because citizens of all those cities went out, opened the gate and handed the key of the city to the occupiers. And sometimes it is a viable solution. If there's no possibility to win, of course you have some deal with this problem. And during the wartime, it was usual, also during the Middle Ages, that it's somehow also matters today that the actions of aggressor depend in conquered territories depend very much on how the victim acted before. It means if they surrendered before even siege of the city, for example, so everything was left as it was. If they surrendered after the siege, so the citizens were left to go out of the city with what they can carry on. And that was it. And if they were fighting until the end, all of them were killed. So that was the usual tactic, so of course you have to calculate at the end. Of course it creates huge incentive to bully around if you know that everyone is calculating. But anyway, this is quite an option. And collaborating with bully or exploiting a bully is also a tactic, because in the case of Ukraine and Russia, in case of this gas conflict, receiving cheaper gas, of course, it's quite a good deal. You know, you sell something, but you also get something. The bullies are usually quite stupid ones, you know, exploiting their own people and then sending some subsidies to abroad in order to buy out, you know, like friendship from those countries. One more thing I want to stress is openness to investment. In Austrian economics, there is usual to speak about how investment fosters economic growth, and that's completely right. But in the case of some investment from bullying country, the question seems to be more complicated. It's like in the UK or other countries before, like investment from such companies as Gazprom, it is usually treated as it is, you know, why do we have to accept this investment from this country because they will make an influence on us. And that looks quite reasonable argumentation, but in fact it is completely true. Because if you look at the practical economics of this, you may see that, you know, usually small free countries is better placed to make and show profits and even to launder money in case of managers of state-run huge companies. And in fact, managers of such companies very often actually do so. It is very beneficial for them to invest abroad and to show profits and to take profits away somehow. And then, of course, abundance of investment from different countries, it creates mechanisms of checks and balances, including from different investment from different pools. And then, if a small free country has investment from bullying neighbor, of course, bullying neighbor has less incentives to attack a country or to use economic blockade against the country, because first of all, what harms its investments. For example, in energy is the first example. If you let all the energy companies be bought out by, let's say, Russian companies, in this case, Russia will not be interested in economic blockade or in not selling energy to this country. So this is completely contrary to what is usually believed. And one more thing is what not to be done in case of small country. And what not to be done is, of course, not to intervene into the markets, into the actions of people, because first of all it reduces possibilities to fight privately, because usually arms are seized and possibilities to adapt to ever-changing situation is diminished, and actually the costs of conflict are externalized, and in the absence of internalization there is no need for every citizen to think about how to adapt the situation and how to deal in this case when you have a bullying neighbor nearby. And one more thing, very important one is, that is demonstration against NATO in Ukraine, and what they say is natural gas is what we pay for NATO, and actually this is right, but this is a trade-off. This is this bronze soldier in Estonia, which was moved away from the place, and then there were riots and everything. And you know, some people call it a soldier liberator, some people call it a monument to unknown greatness. Which I think both are kind of true. But let me elaborate a little bit about state, the concepts of state. If all places, all territories in Estonia would be private ones, and all effort would be private ones, so of course this monument would have been in place of some kind of owner. And of course it would be for owner to decide whether to have this monument in this place or not to have it. But in this case, it was not the private owned place. And it meant that moving out this monument was a political decision. And of course, you know, for bully, always more easy to bully around if you have someone similar across the border, if you have some other political power. And of course, if you simply do not have someone to bully in your level, you simply are not able to do it. So in many instances, I'm very convinced that there's always privatization, a very good tool in order to avoid bullying. And especially in the case of this new fashionable gas or electricity or oil wars or energy as geopolitical tool. In case of private energy companies, there's no politicians involved in the process, and there's no possibility of pressing on energy issues in order to get something politically, because it's private. Or in case, for example, in the same Russification in Baltic states, usually less Russian people, less Russian students are willing to attend Russian schools now, and there are decisions to close some Russian schools. But of course, as schools are run by government, of course it's a political decision. And as it is political decisions, all Nazi or other so-called Russian patriots are able to say that, those politicians, they're closing our Russian schools abroad, so they are bullying around. But if we imagine a situation when all schools are private, we have fair play rules in this sector, so it means that, the Russian government would have nobody to pay. That would be a completely different situation. And one more argument, what not to do, or good lesson, historical lessons. Some observers, they pay attention to the fact that in case when you have local dictator or authoritarian regime in a country, it means that dictator tries everything to persuade people just to obey the government. And actually for ordinary people, it's not a big deal whether you obey one government or another government. While in case of free nation, it is in the essence, in the blood of people that, I'm free. I'm free from my own government, and it means that I will try to keep my freedom in the case of possible aggression from abroad. So this kind of centralization in order to protect the country, actually in most cases works against the goal that it had been employed. And just make a conclusion, I would say that in case for conclusion, I would say that very often strategies to stand against strong bullying neighbor in creating strong military power inside a country is simply wrong. You have to have decentralized solutions in order to be successive in long run and sometimes even in short run. And the other aspect is that the only exception when military or centralized finance military may be employed is when this military was already created. But it's not a strategy, it's simply like use of attack of the existing power. So that's my reflections on foreign policies of small scale. Thank you. This is Jacob.